So I do have a thing every now and then where I will visit a home that I lived in. I went to Malvern, but I didn't get close enough to the actual house where I lived. I think part of the area where the house where we lived is demolished. Like there was this huge section off to the side of it, which was like strange. I don't know what it was. It was like a concrete park thing. It was like a large walk area you could do, sort of like Yelverton Aerodrome, but more concrete, and you could walk around this thing. And I think that they've demolished whatever that was, that strange remnant place, and they've built something there, like a new housing estate. So it's a bit confusing to find out the place where I lived, and it probably looks slightly different. But our garden kind of, not our garden, but the front of our house faced the Malvern Hills, which is pretty cool. So it'd be good to revisit the Malvern Hills, climb a few more of them, because I only did a few. And while I'm there, try and walk past my old house if I can work out where it is. That's a subject for a future video about property, and that chains on to something else that'd be nice to talk about. But that subject would be like my connection to places I've lived in the past, to the point where I think I should still be a part of those properties. Like, it's a view that like semi leads into socialism, because it's like, but I mean, like, I'm the kids of the people who sold the house. I don't know if my parents feel similarly about it, but it's like places we used to live. I still feel like they're part of, or they should be part of my life, but in actual fact, you know, it's my parents have taken the house they lived in and sold it to someone else for their pleasure to live in. You know, with their money, their effort through life, the sweat of their brow, they have purchased from my parents the house where my parents used to live, and that has exchanged hands. Like owning a sword for a long time and like selling that sword to someone else, and that's for them to enjoy now, that's for them to have and mess about with, but you still remember all the times you spent with that sword. This is a weird example, by the way. I do own a sword. Yeah. That's the sort of thing that would be in that subject video. And while we're on the subject of property, I was talking to someone on Twitter the other night. It's interesting. I think they might have been libertarian, I'm not sure. Maybe they weren't. But they raised some interesting points, and they were quite reasonable to talk to. We were talking about the AnCap or libertarian view on property, and like, you have a property that's yours and you own it. It's your property. You can do what you want with it. Let's say it's a house or land. I think we're talking about that. Now, what if you die? The house doesn't become abandoned, does it? It goes to your next of kin. It goes to your kids. That's inheritance. And if it's not inheritance, like what if we got the example of like an old lady. She's got a house. She's very lonely. She doesn't have. This is a very rare example. I was trying to tell the guy who I was talking to, but he was like, for the sake of argument, there's this old lonely lady. She doesn't have friends. She doesn't have family somehow. Like, all her family are dead except her, and she's old and she's gonna die soon. And for some reason, she doesn't have any friends or any connections whatsoever. So inheritance can't happen because she's got no family, no kids. They're all dead. And maybe she didn't write a will, which is dumb. I think everyone should write a will, because then you know where your property's going when you die. And that will should change organically if the member of your family who's outlined in the will dies while you're still alive. That will should change. Maybe that's the solution, actually. The will should keep changing as the situation changes. You should keep changing your will. But for the sake of argument, what if she never changed her will, or she never wrote a will, or she never outlined anyone to give her property to in the case that she died in her will? This old lady dies. Now there's a fully abandoned property. The property is like, we're talking AnCap society here, so the property is not owned by government. It cannot be owned by government, cannot be taken by government. It has no custodian. The owner's dead. It has no inheritance. The family is dead. No will, so no friends outlined in the will to give the house to. Literally, the house can go to no one. The one who owns it is dead. So nobody owns that house. So he was like saying, what's your opinion on these truly abandoned properties? And I was like, wow, okay, you've actually stumbled on one of those controversial topics that is difficult for AnCaps to answer. And that doesn't give anyone license to say, oh, well, there should be a government and the government should have it. Or it should just be handed out to someone else. Redistribution of wealth, i.e. communism, should just be given to someone random for free. Like, by who? Who claims authority? No one can claim authority over the property to say that they're the owner, to have the superiority to say that they're allowed to donate that property to someone else to live in. You see what I mean? All the owners of that property, that private property, are dead, so it is a truly abandoned property. And I suppose you'd leave it alone. One thing you could possibly do, I guess, would be track down the previous owner of the property before it was sold to the old dying lady and give it to them. That'd probably be, I guess, the best thing to do. But they did sell that property to the old lady. But then does that mean that the property reverts back to the previous owner? I mean, that's the nearest thing you could do, right? Is trace back whoever owned the property previously, and if they're dead, you track back whoever owned the property before that. And then I suppose the question could arise, what if all those people are dead? Like the old lady bought it off someone who themselves was elderly and has passed away ages ago. And the previous owner before that was elderly and they passed away even longer ago. So you still have this fully abandoned property, no owner. I guess it just sits there and the ferns take over. You know, the brambles and the bushes and the plants and the foliage claim it. I suppose that's what you have to do, is kind of just leave it alone. That's the only right thing to do. Is maybe that's how the property of nobody exists? I mean, could you say at that point that because the property belongs to nobody at all, that anyone can walk on that land and it is in fact a true case of public property, like anyone can go there? Or would you say that nobody can go there because there's no private owner to say that, to consent that other people are allowed on that property? But, you know, they're dead, so, you know, do you need the consent of a dead person to enter property? If they're dead, they don't exist physically in the world anymore, so, I mean, you could respect a gravestone of the dead people, but can you? Because that person's dead and they can't defend themselves with arms or anything because they don't exist anymore. And the gravestone is on someone else's private property who owns it. So the private property owner of the land that the grave and the gravestone are on, they have the say whether that can be desecrated or the corpse can be dug up and thrown away and the gravestone can be chucked out. You know, so that is a really, I mean, I might just release this as a video talking about that, and I'll post to you the little discussion we had. So here is the little discussion I had on Twitter. It's only a few tweets long. It's like 4 to 6 tweets long. Bam. And yeah, it's really interesting, like as an AnCap, where you bump into bits of your ideology that you don't have an answer for, because that's like the controversial topics that you need to kind of think about and build an answer for, to flesh out your ideology and to make sure there are no inconsistencies. So there's another one, which is how would prisons and courts function in an AnCap society, and my current idea is that they wouldn't. So, you know, if you violate property, you're in danger of death, essentially. Because you can't really have a prison system, because that is, I mean, imprisoning someone is sort of antithetical to freedom, in the respect that the people, that nobody can be superior enough to assign themselves as the prison wardens to take away someone's freedom. On the other side of it, the prisoner side, it doesn't really matter, because they have forfeited their right to freedom and property by violating the freedom and property of others. So, you know, they've basically lost their right to life by violating property. So I'd say at that point, you know,
You're dead! I'll kill you! Don't come in! You don't come in here.
but they wouldn't be able to enslave them because then they'd become a slave master, and that goes against AnCap principles. So they'd probably die from it, to be honest. I mean, the judicial system would... there wouldn't really be one. It would literally be, these are the consequences of what you've done. You violated your right to life by choosing to do this thing that is the most abhorrent thing you could possibly do in the society. Like to rape someone, to steal from them, to enter their land, and not heed the 3 warnings to get off the land. You know, that's another contention, is that you can enter land by mistake. So what do you do then? Because you violated property by mistake. So you heed the 3 warnings to get off, sure. But what if it's quite large land and the landowner is not there at the time to see it? Maybe they pick it up on CCTV later. You know, that I guess they gotta find that person and confront them before they take action, shall we say. Because it could be a mistake. It could be a mistake. So maybe that's something that should be built into AnCap ideology, is that each individual should, before they act, they should question the person individually and personally. They should question the supposed violator of property just to check that they have violated property or not. Like whether they're remorseful would be one, or whether they're claiming it's an accident would be another. And there would be some degree of trade there because of capitalism, which goes hand in hand with anarchy and is essentially the same thing. There'd be some degree of trade. I've got to get going to work soon and bring this vlog to a close. Anyway, yeah, that's why it's tricky knowing whether they'd be courts or prisons or anything like that in an AnCap society, and I would just say probably not. Until we can figure out some sort of substitute for them that works, there would probably not be any courts or anything. It would be sort of on-the-spot justice, which sounds a bit Judge Dredd in a way. But Judge Dredd's about police forces and authority and government, whereas what I'm talking about is the individual defending their home or property. So it's not like Judge Dredd, but the justice bit of justice given in the moment of the situation, you could say there's some sort of Judge Dredd element to that bit. And there's another thing, what was there? Yeah, there's obviously the wild camping ban on Dartmoor. I think my views got shaped by that. At first, when I got confronted with that really struck me as a controversial issue for an AnCap, because we are used to having these public byways where we go walking and hiking. And I don't think most people notice or take for granted, or a lot of them are indoctrinated by the commies that did the Crow Act and the Kinder Scout mass trespass bullshit. So a lot of normies are indoctrinated by that to believe that's the way of things. That's not. You should not violate private property, even when you're hiking. But yeah, like I say, I've accidentally done it a few times, so that needs to be built into the ideology. But yeah, like, that's the whole thing of like, where is public property and where is private property, and that most people don't know that when they go hiking on the moors and stuff, they're actually hiking along private property almost all the time. Basically all the time. Unless they're somehow between the land boundary between 2 fields, I think, where one farmer's land ends and another farmer's land ends, and then there's the buffer zone of the border. Sometimes we'll have a footpath through it, and like, does someone own the footpath? I think in some cases, nobody really owns the footpath, although the government may try and lay claim to it and say they do, but they don't actually own anything. Because they just steal from everyone else who works. So they physically can't own anything. But yeah, so take government out of the equation. That land on that footpath, unless someone like owns the footpath itself as a little tiny strip of land that goes between two other sets of big blocky land, that could be an owned footpath privately, or it could just be the gap between two private lands, in which case it's like, that's one of those rare examples of actual public ground where anyone can access it and anyone can go. So it's really interesting, like how most people don't know when they go hiking on what is called public land but isn't, that they're actually on private land the whole time. And it's by the generosity of the landowner that they're there in some cases, but in other cases it's not via the generosity of the landowner. It's been forced upon them by the communists and the government, the state, telling them via things like this Crow Act that they must donate part of their land, which doesn't belong to the government at all, so they're not legitimate in their ability to do this. Telling the landowner that they must donate part of their land to public access against the landowner's consent with their private property. And that is not right. So the AnCap would have to notice that, you know, when you go walking out in public, you're either violating private property, or you're there by the generosity of the landowner, or you could be there by paying for access to that private property, which would go to the landowner. Either way, the landowner is obviously the one who's entitled to say what does or doesn't happen with their land, not the fucking government. Yeah. So there's a little video there about things that challenge the AnCap ideology that still need sorting out. So could say libertarian ideology, but AnCap goes a little bit more further into, I don't want to call it purity, but further into the strength of anti-state themes and pro-freedom themes, which is why I prefer it to being called a libertarian outright. See you later, folks. Thank you for watching.